Are you really laughing at an old patch? While the flag rope clicks in the wind, the two young Marines scoffed at the frayed cloth on Walter's toolbox, a small symbol, pressed by years of quiet service. Still, when the garage lights dimmed and silence pulsed like a slow heartbeat, that worn patch caught a line of gold, as if remembering something the room had forgotten. Anyway, quiet men leave echoes too, let me take you back. The late afternoon sun slid through the dusty windows of Walter Reed's garage, settling in slow amber layers across the concrete floor. The place smelled faintly of motor oil and old cedar's steady familiar notes that matched the quiet rhythm of the man who worked there. Walter moved with the calm certainty of someone who'd spent decades solving problems with his hands, not his voice. At 65, he carried his years lightly, like an old coat he still trusted. The rumble of a pickup broke the stillness. Two young Marines climbed out their boots, hitting the driveway with quick, confident thuds. They pushed open the garage door without hesitation. "Hey, sir," the taller one said. "Truck's been making a weird noise. Think you can take a look?" Walter gave a small nod. "Sure thing. Pull it in." While the engine clicked and cooled, the Marine's attention drifted straight to the metal toolbox near the workbench. The patch sewn across the lid caught a slant of golden light, revealing its frayed edges and faded threading. It didn't look like much to the untrained eye, just an old square of cloth clinging stubbornly to metal. The taller Marine leaned closer, squinting, as if the patch insulted him personally. "What kind of patch is that, old man?" His buddy barked a laugh, loud enough to bounce off the garage walls. "Looks like my grandpa's lost sticker." Walter paused, letting their words hang in the warm, dusty air. His hand settled gently atop the toolbox, fingers brushing the worn fabric. "It belonged to a team I served with," he said, voice steady, almost soft. The Marines exchanged looks, half amusement, half dismissal. Youth can be loud in all the wrong ways. From the doorway, Liam, 8 years old and loyal as a porch-light moth, froze mid-step. He'd stopped by to return a screwdriver Walter had lent him that morning. Now he stood still, watching the Marines with cautious eyes. He didn't like the way they spoke, not the words themselves, but the tone. The small, sharp kind of disrespect that didn't need shouting to sting. The shorter Marine nudged his partner and jerked his chin toward the truck. "Let's go, we don't have all day." They strutted out, their laughter trailing behind them like exhaust. Walter followed them only long enough to wave them off. When the garage door rolled back down, silence slipped into the room again, easy and familiar. He returned to the toolbox and rested his hand on the patch thumb, tracing the curve of a faded emblem, nearly erased by time. Liam stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Why'd they laugh at your patch?" "Mr. Walter," Walter looked over, meeting the boy's earnest gaze. "Sometimes folks laugh when they don't understand something," he said. "It's easier for them than asking." Liam nodded slowly, absorbing the thought, with the seriousness only children carry. Outside, the sun dipped lower, turning the garage shadows long and thin. The old patch caught one last glint of gold, quiet, stubborn, unbothered by the noise of younger men. And Walter, hands folded behind his back, stood beside it, with the same unshaken calm, as if both man and patch had weathered far louder storms than a couple of careless laughs. The morning settled over Cedar Street with a gray, wintry stillness, the kind that made every sound feel closer than it was. Walter Reed's garage door was open just wide enough to let in a ribbon of cold air carrying the scent of pine needles and distant chimney smoke. He worked quietly over an old sedan, hands steady, movements practiced and sure. The crunch of footsteps on gravel broke the calm. Harold Jennings, the HOA manager, appeared at the threshold, clipboard tucked under his arm, expression pinched the way a man looks when he's already decided he won't like what he sees. Walter Harold began clearing his throat with unnecessary ceremony. "We need to discuss your workspace again. It's not meeting neighborhood standards. Section 12B is very clear." Walter straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "What seems to be the issue today, Harold?" Harold stepped inside, eyes flicking sharply across the counters, the stacked parts, the coiled wires. But what held his stare, what always did, was the patch resting atop the metal toolbox. The fabric's worn edges and faded emblems seemed to offend him more than any stray bolt on the floor. He pointed at it as if identifying contraband. "That thing again. Old symbols don't mean much anymore." Walter didn't rise to it. He rarely did. "It stays where it is," he said simply. Harold scribbled on his clipboard, with the irritation of a man denied an easy victory. "You know, if you'd just tidy this place the way the guidelines outline, we wouldn't have to keep having these conversations." Walter returned to the engine compartment, tightening a loose belt with steady hands. "I've kept this garage the same way for 30 years. And times change, Walter." Harold sniffed as if the air itself disagreed with him. The neighborhood expects a certain image. Before Walter could respond, a bike wheel whirred up the driveway. Liam, cheeks pink from the cold, skidded to a stop and hopped off. He surveyed the scene, the clipboard, the stern posture, Walter's quiet steadiness, with the sharp instinct of children who sense tension before they understand it. "Morning, Mr. Walter," Liam said, then glanced at Harold with polite confusion. Harold forced a thin smile. "Young man." Liam's gaze drifted to the patch as it always seemed to. "Why do you keep that cloth, Mr. Walter?" This time Walter paused. He looked at the boy, then at the patch fingertips brushing its frayed edge with something close to reverence. "Some things outlast noise," he said gently. Liam nodded as if he felt the truth of the words, even if he couldn't fully grasp them. The patch shimmered slightly under a stray sunbeam, catching just enough warmth to soften its worn threads. Harold, unimpressed, clicked his pen shut with finality. "Well, regardless of sentiment, rules are rules. I'll be noting this." He tapped the clipboard. "Expect follow-up." He turned on his heel with the briskness of someone who believed authority should never have to linger. When he was gone, the space felt larger, not quieter, but freer. Walter breathed in slowly, letting the tension dissolve into the familiar smells of grease and metal. Liam pushed his bike closer, resting one foot on the pedal. "Mom says you always leave extra tips at the diner," Liam said. "She says people who do that are good folks." Walter chuckled softly. "I just like the coffee." "But Mom said—" "Sometimes folks see things their own way," Walter said. "Doesn't mean they're wrong. Doesn't mean they're right either." Liam thought on that for a long moment. "So, you're going to keep the patch?" Walter closed the toolbox gently, the patch breathing out a soft whisper of cloth against metal. "I'm going to keep the things that matter," he said. Outside, a gust stirred the hanging pine boughs, rattling them like quiet bells. Thanksgiving week was settling in, slow, cold, and watchful. Walter stepped out to pull the door halfway closed, letting in just enough light to keep the garage warm. Behind him, the patch remained where it had always been, small, faded, and steady, holding its ground against the noise of the world. The post office in town always felt a little older in late November, scuffed counters, humming lights, and the soft shuffle of boots on the worn linoleum. Walter joined the line with a small parcel tucked under his arm, the brown paper tied neatly with twine. He didn't mind waiting. He'd spent enough of his life in lines much longer than this one. Two men near the stamp display were talking just loud enough for their words to travel. "That old mechanic thinks he's still Navy," one said. Yeah, I heard he's got radios in his garage. HOA's breathing down his neck. Walter kept his eyes forward. The comments didn't sting so much as settle like dust that never quite stayed swept away. A door opened behind him, and Raymond Cole, the retired fire chief, stepped inside. His coat smelled faintly of wood smoke, and his presence carried the weight of someone who had lived long enough to understand when silence served better than protest. He fell into line behind Walter without a word. After a moment, Raymond murmured, "Town talks too much these days." Walter offered a small, tired smile. "Always has." Raymond studied him with the slow patience of a man who'd known storms in every form. "You holding up best I can," Walter replied. When Walter left the post office, the air outside had grown colder, sharper. Clouds hung low over the roofs like heavy gray blankets waiting to drop. He walked home with his hands tucked into his jacket, the parcel under his arm tapping lightly against his side. At the garage, Harold Jennings was already there, posture stiff and purposeful, clipboard in hand again. "Walter," he called before Walter could even set the parcel down. "I need to repeat myself. Take that radio down. This is your last warning." Walter didn't argue. He stepped inside, set the parcel on the bench, and climbed the small ladder to loosen the mount. The radio's wires dangled like veins of an old machine that still had work left to do. He unfastened them one by one, steady and calm. Liam appeared in the doorway, bike abandoned on the driveway. He didn't speak. He just watched Walter, then walked over and began gathering the loose wires into loops, small hands moving carefully as if handling something fragile. Walter glanced at him. "You don't have to help with this." "I know," Liam said quietly. They worked together without another word. The ladder creaked, the metal clicked, and the cold air seeped into the edges of the room. When the last wire was coiled, Walter stepped back. The garage felt strangely emptier, quieter than it should have been. A low hum from the overhead lights filled the silence, soft and steady. Walter stood still for a moment, listening to it, letting it settle around him like a thin blanket of thought. Outside, the wind pushed against the garage door, rattling it once. The storm was closer than anyone realized. The wind arrived first, long, uneven bursts that slapped loose shingles and sent leaves skittering across Cedar Street. By late afternoon, the storm had rolled in fully, dragging the sky down until the whole town looked washed in steel gray. Power lines shook. Sirens wailed once, then went silent. People began drifting toward Walter's garage, drawn by the only steady light still glowing on the block. The fluorescent tubes flickered now and then, but they held. A couple of neighbors stepped inside, rain on their shoulders, voices tight with worry. "Rescue team can't reach the West Ridge," someone said. "Radios are dead." Walter didn't answer. He walked to the bench and set his hand on the battered toolbox, its cloth patch catching the lamp's dull shine. He breathed once, long and careful, then unlatched the old radio Jennings had made him take down. Its knobs clicked in his familiar, practiced rhythm. Raymond Cole pushed through the doorway, shaking off water. He looked at the crowd, then at Walter, bent over the radio, head tilted just so. "If anyone can hear through this storm," Raymond said softly, "it's him." The garage lights flickered again as a dark SUV rolled to a stop outside. Its headlights carved white arcs through the rain. When the door opened, a Navy commander stepped out, coat snapping in the wind, expression tight with urgency. He entered the garage and froze. The beam from the overhead light slid across the edge of Walter's toolbox, landing squarely on the faded patch, stitched colors softened by decades, the emblem barely visible unless you knew exactly what you were looking at. The commander knew. His breath caught, and the rest of the room seemed to fall away. He took one step closer, voice dropping to a whisper meant for only one man. Sir Walter lifted his eyes, surprised, but steady. The commander turned toward his team. "Give him the channel. He knows the pattern." They moved aside instantly. One handed over a portable set, another cleared the bench. Walter didn't rush. He tuned carefully, guiding the dial through layers of storm static, until a faint thread of sound broke through, broken but alive. "There," Walter said. "They're trying to transmit uphill. Shift your relay 5 degrees east. Repeat the call." The commander relayed the order. A moment later, a clearer signal crackled through the speaker, a voice from the stranded rescue team cutting past the thunder outside. "We've got them," the commander said, relief loosening his shoulders. Walter kept working, correcting frequencies, steadying the channel, until the team on the ridge confirmed safe positions and evacuation routes. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the old mechanic, mocked only days before, guided a modern rescue effort with the quiet certainty of someone who had done this all his life. Outside, the storm kept roaring, but inside the garage something else had settled recognition. The storm eased the way an old engine winds down slowly, unevenly, with a last shudder before settling into quiet. By the time the radios cleared completely, the whole garage erupted in soft relief. Someone let out a shaky laugh. Another murmured a prayer. The tension that had held the town in one tight grip finally began to loosen. "The rescue team's safe," Raymond announced, lowering his headset. "All accounted for." A ripple of gratitude moved through the crowd. People turned toward Walter, some hesitant, some ashamed, because everyone knew whose steady hands had pulled the signal back from the storm. Harold Jennings stepped forward first. His clipboard was gone, his voice smaller than it had been in weeks. "Walter, I judged you wrong," he said. "I think most of us did." Walter only nodded. The quiet in the garage felt different now, not heavy, not doubtful, just steady. The 2 young Marines from earlier pushed their way through the doorway, uniforms damp from the weather. They didn't joke this time. No smirks, no sideways glances. The taller one looked at the toolbox patch, then lifted his chin. "Sir," he said simply. Not a whisper, just a respectful word spoken the way men do when they've learned something important about themselves. The commander, still nearby, stepped closer to the bench. His hand hovered respectfully before brushing the faded cloth with the back of his fingers. "This patch saved men long before tonight," he said. "Some symbols don't fade." No one argued. Someone arrived from the diner across the street with a cardboard tray of warm cocoa steam drifting into the chilly air. Cups were passed around. Walter accepted his with a quiet thanks, the warmth settling into his hands, as neighbors gathered closer, forming a loose circle around him. Liam stayed at Walter's side, his eyes bright with pride. "You did it, Mr. Walter," he said. They all saw it. Walter shook his head gently. "Storms show what people can do together. That's all." Across the room, an older woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, soft, thoughtful, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. Funny how a whisper can outlast a whole room's laughter. A few people nodded, glancing again at the patch, then at Walter. The echo of earlier mockery had finally been replaced quietly, completely, by something far steadier: respect. The Veterans Hall smelled faintly of old pine and polished brass, the kind of quiet place where stories lived longer than the men who earned them. Morning light slanted through the high windows, catching the new glass frame hung on the center wall. Inside it, resting against a deep blue backing cloth, was the faded toolbox patch, the same one that once sat unnoticed on Walter's old metal chest, the same one 2 young Marines had laughed at not many days before. Now it held a place of honor. Beneath the frame, a small plaque read, "He kept the signal alive, Thanksgiving storm rescue." People from town stood in a loose semicircle, hats in hand, voices low out of simple respect. Some had been there the night the radios failed. Some had heard the story only afterward. But all of them understood why the patch was here. The Navy commander stepped forward, hands behind his back. He studied the frame a long moment, before giving Walter a small, knowing smile. "Some respect speaks quietest, sir." That one word, sir, settled over the room like a gentle chord. A few heads bowed without thinking. The two Marines from the garage arrived next. This time they didn't hide behind bravado. They removed their caps, holding them to their chests as they stopped in front of Walter. "Thank you," the taller one said. "We didn't see it before." Walter nodded, accepting the gesture without making them squirm. "Takes folks time. Nothing wrong with that." Liam stood close, practically vibrating. He kept glancing at the framed patch like it was some sacred relic. Walter noticed and reached into his jacket. "I reckon this belongs with someone who'll understand it," he said, handing the boy a small cloth bundle. Liam unfolded it carefully. Inside was a replica stitched by Walter himself, thread slightly uneven, but made with care. "For me," the boy whispered. Walter chuckled softly. "For you to remember the night you helped more than you think. Keep it close." Later that afternoon, the two of them walked back toward the quiet street that led home. The storm debris was mostly cleared, and the town felt lighter, like it had taken one deep breath it had held for years. On the porch swing, the boards creaked the way old wood does when it's earned the right to. The ocean breeze drifted in from somewhere past the rooftops, carrying salt and late autumn warmth. Walter eased himself onto the swing. Liam sat beside him, still holding the replica patch like something fragile. The sun dipped low, brushing the edges of the world in gold. Walter looked out toward the fading light. "Storms come and go," he said, voice soft. "But respect kid that stays." Liam nodded, the swing rocking gently beneath them. The patch one in the hall, one in his hands, glowed warm in the last light of day. The town settled into a calmer rhythm after the storm, and on quiet evenings you could still find Walter on his porch swing, the salt air drifting in while the framed patch at the Veterans Hall caught the last gold of the day. Still, folks said the rescue would have been a different story without him, and that kind of gratitude traveled through the community the way a winter window lamp guides a traveler home. Neighbors who once misunderstood him now paused to shake his hand, and more than one Marine returned just to stand before that patch in glass, because sometimes a single quiet moment changes what a whole room remembers. And as Walter leaned back, watching Liam run a thumb across the replica patch he'd been given, he smiled and spoke the truth he'd lived by for years. "Respect lasts, kid, louder than any laugh and steadier than any storm."